Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost down this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost down this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas, and this is Free the Rabbits. And how are all the free-range rabbits doing out there today? I hope you've had a good week, and we are going to do something a little bit different today. I know that generally I present a topic, and I've done a ton of research on the topic, and then I'll present it to you, and then obviously you can walk away with it with whatever ideas that you have from it. Whether you like it, don't like it, take some of it, it's all good. That's what we're here for, right? But this is going to be a little bit different today. I am going to mix some research in, but I'm going to present 3 stories that have happened in my personal life over the past 20 plus years. Some very interesting paranormal stories. I've got a really fascinating UFO story. It's something I haven't done all in one place yet. I've told these stories sporadically over the years on different podcasts, and I know the first time I ever was on a podcast was the Confessionals. That was about almost 4 years ago now, but I did talk about a couple of my experiences there, and one of them I haven't talked about at all on any podcast, and then the other one I talked about recently on the Confessionals, and it was in conjunction with Lilith, but I do want to talk about it again today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving you some research on the topic, and then I'll tell you my experience. So I've got 3 different experiences today, and I'm going to break it down that way so you guys can get an idea of what I think was happening during these instances before I even get to the instance. And then I can expound a little more from there. But I thought this would be something fun to do, especially since we have Christmas coming up and everybody's getting ready for the holidays, and it would be a really fun way of bringing in the Christmas season and New Year's season. You know, people like to tell stories, so I figure this would be a good way for me to do that. And we will start today with demons. And before I get to my particular story, I'm going to talk a little bit about demonic entities, what they've been said to have been in certain cultures, and then my take on demonic entities, where I think that they originate from. And I think a lot of you guys that listen to the show would probably agree with a lot of what I'm about to say. But one thing you haven't heard is my particular paranormal story that goes along with it. So I'll give you a little mainstream jargon, obviously up front, like I normally do, of what is said when the word demon's brought up. A demon is a malevolent supernatural entity. So generally, they're said to be evil. However, in some cultures, they are said to be more impartial, and they're neither good nor bad. They're just going to do what they want to do. This is where the idea of the archons come from in Gnosticism. Very similar type of ideology. And I am not in the camp of thinking that demonic entities are benevolent in any shape, form, or fashion. I think they're purely malevolent if you understand where they come from. But again, this is just, there are different cultures that have different ideas about this. And obviously, if you have specific gods that are over certain cultures, then they would be working in conjunction with these demonic entities, and they would be presented as more neutral or good in some cases. Now, historically, belief in demons or stories about demons occurs in folklore, mythology, religion, and literature. These beliefs are reflected in media, including comics, fiction, film, television, and video games. So you'll notice generally in the mainstream starts pumping out the word demon, they're going to revert to modern media as the example for why it's fictional, that these entities don't exist. They're just a figment of our imagination. They are from a time of the past, ancient Near Eastern religions, all the Abrahamic religions, early Judaism, medieval Christian demonology. All of these things are going to point to and say, well, this is just ancient man's way of trying to figure things out. And people that believe in that now are stupid. That's a humanistic approach, right? We're going to hear that a lot when we talk about demonic entities. You'll hear that from some Satanists as well, the ones that are atheists, not the ones that are followers of the Temple of Set, like Thomas Aquinas, but more along the lines of what Anton LaVey did on the back end of his career, or at least what he presented to people, what he said that Satanism was. However, I also think that you see a lot of these guys who present Satanism as a form of atheism. I would say even connect it to Aleister Crowley's Thelema, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. That would be living your life as if nothing can oppose you. However, we know Aleister Crowley was deeply involved with angelic beings and demonic entities throughout his career, so he wasn't one of those. I just brought that up as an example because some people do use that terminology from the religion of Thelema as an example of, I'm going to live my life the way I want to. There aren't any other opposing forces that are out there to stop me. And that's what a lot of modern Satanism has become. However, you're going to see guys that present that forefront, but behind the scenes, they're completely bought in. They're completely bought into the occult. They're completely bought into, I would say, the occulted areas of Gnosticism as well, because you're going to see these Gnostics push a very negative viewpoint, even though they point to it as, oh, no, we're just seeking out the real truth, the real esoteric knowledge. You'll find that their whole basis is to become a god. And that's a whole other topic, and I plan on doing that pretty soon, because anytime I bring up the word Yahweh, I always get somebody in the comments or somebody reaching out saying that he's a evil god. He was at the bottom of this pantheon of gods in Gnosticism, and I'm going to do an episode where I'm going to show you that that's an inversion tactic. That has been an inversion tactic from the beginning of time, where you take what's at the highest and move it to the lowest, and you take what's at the lowest and move it to the highest. And this is very typical of people who believe in as above, so below. So you're going to see this inversion tactic constantly when it comes to taking what's good and then presenting it as bad and vice versa. You're going to see a lot of this. What's up, guys? Before we get back into the episode, I just wanted to let people know here on YouTube who have been reaching out to me asking how they can donate to the show to help with the show's growth. You can become a member here on YouTube now. We have 3 different tiers: Nephilim Portal Babies, Nephilim Hunter, and Good Nephilim. And all of them have a few different things that are different from each other. One of the main things that all 3 of them have is custom emojis that you can use in any of the chats or in any of the comments. Again, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the show, and that's the best way possible to donate is your time. And make sure you share it, guys. Share the show. Now, the etymology of the word demon comes from ancient Greek. It's a daemon. It denotes a spirit or divine power, much like the Latin genius or numen. Daemon most likely came from the Greek verb dieste, to divide or distribute, and it most notably appears in philosophical works of Plato, where it describes the divine inspiration of Socrates. So the original Greek word doesn't necessarily carry a negative connotation. However, the implementation of the Koine Greek word daemonian is ascribed to a entity of a negative nature. So even though the original Greek word daemon just meant spirit or divine power, when the New Testament was written in the Koine Greek, you'll see this word used as a negative connotation because it's from this root word daemonian, and that is from a negative connotation. And we can go back to even ancient Egyptian culture where they had certain entities that played into what we would consider demonic entities now, even though the word wasn't used back then. But in Egyptian culture, they had things called the Hatiae, which are knife bearers or murderers, but these were demonic entities. You have the Shamiae, a wandering demon. You have the Ak, which is undead or ghosts. We have the Intep. It was a demon with the head of a dog and body of a baboon who protected the temple of Thoth. We have the Apep, also known as Apophis, and this deity represented chaos and darkness and was the opponent of Ma'at and light. So this was that almost yin-yang type of battle between these 2 entities. You had the negative, which was Apep, and then the positive, which was Ma'at. And these Egyptian entities, these demons, were divided into 2 classes, guardians and wanderers. So you had these guardian demonic entities that would guard certain tombs, guard certain entryways, sometimes into the underworld. And that's why I've always attributed those type of demonic entities to be some sort of derivative of the cherubim in angelology. And I know we would consider demonic entities, which I'm going to get to in a second, as being the dead spirits of the Nephilim, but that would also be attributed to hybrids as well if they came from that same type of interaction from angelic beings and humankind or animal kind, which I feel like that if they weren't redeemed, then their demonic souls are always looking for host bodies. These are these demonic entities that harass us to this day. We can go to Mesopotamian culture to talk about the Gala, and this is in Sumerian, and they were great demons or devils of the ancient Mesopotamian underworld. And they lived in a place called Ker, which was a dark, shadowy underworld located deep below the surface of the earth. And this is all in Sumerian mythology. And if you remember when I did the episode Old Earth, the King's List, I talked about the 5th angelic king, who was Dumazid the shepherd, And I talked about how he was drugged down into the underworld or kept in the underworld by these Gala. They held him down there. And this is when Inanna perceived that Dumazid had failed to properly mourn her death. And these entities basically drug him down there, which is very interesting. But in Sumerian mythology, they do talk about demonic entities, but they are called the Gala. And there's also another entity talked about in Sumerian culture called the Lamashtu. And she was a demonic goddess with the head of a lion, the teeth of a donkey, naked breast, a hairy body, hands stained, some people think with blood, long fingers and fingernails, and the feet of an Anzu. And if you want to know what an Anzu is, it is generally depicted as a massive bird who can breathe fire and water. So if you have the feet of an Anzu, you're going to have the feet of a bird. And I brought up this particular demonic entity, Lamashtu, because Lamashtu will play in later when I start talking about a pretty prominent demonic entity, Lilith. And I believe that Lamashtu and Lilith are one and the same. I think it was just a change of scenery, change the name. I think a lot of these demonic entities, fallen entities, and Elohim have changed their names throughout history or just changed their names depending on the location that they're in and who's worshiping them. So I think this is a very similar thing with Lamashtu and Lilith, but we'll get in that a little bit later. We know in Islam, generally speaking, when people think of demonic entities, they think of the jinn, and they talk about in their Islamic mysticism, this is also talked about in Jewish mysticism, that King Solomon had a ring, the Seal of Solomon, and the shape's generally depicted as a pentagram or a hexagram, but he could command the Shadim, that would be one word for demonic entities in the Hebrew, and jinn, which is talked about in the Quran. So he could control them using this ring. And that is one thing that you'll see throughout different cultures, different mythologies, that these demonic entities can be directed or symbol. And that's why you'll see a lot of these occultists throughout history that have certain rituals or certain symbols they are used to control these entities, or they think they're controlling them. Sometimes it's to release them. You'll see this a lot. And I think this plays back into, and I'm going to lead into what I think about this stuff, to the book of Enoch and the Watchers and the Nephilim being created. And I will read a little bit out of the book of Enoch in chapter 15. And I know I've read some of this before, but I do like to do this for people that are just joining the channel or just joining the podcast. But I've done some extensive work on Nephilim, and you can hear some of this in my Good Nephilim series. You can hear it throughout a lot of the stuff I talk about. I just did an episode, Saul, the Nephilim king, which is a very interesting topic, that Saul, the first king of Israel, was indeed from a Nephilim bloodline. But this particular apocryphal text is where most people get this idea that the Nephilim, when they die, they have no place to go and their spirits wander the earth, which I agree with. The only thing that I put the caveat to is if a hybrid has repented, has decided to follow Yeshua or Yahweh, then they would be redeemed, so they would not fall under this category. But for the ones that do not or did not, this is what the book of Enoch has to say about it. Chapter 15, verse 1, "And he answered and said to me, I heard his voice, fear not, Enoch, thou righteous man and scribe of righteousness. Approach hither and hear my voice. And go say to the watchers of heaven who have sent thee to intercede for them, you should intercede for men and not men for you. whereof you have left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begotten giants as your sons. Though you were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and have begotten children, the blood of flesh, and as children of men have lusted after flesh and blood, as those also do who die and perish. Therefore I have given them wives also, that they might impregnate them and beget children by them, that thus nothing might be wanting to them on earth. But you were formerly spiritual, living the eternal life and immortal for all generations of the world. And therefore I have not appointed wives for you, for as spiritual ones of the heaven, and heaven is their dwelling. So this is Yahweh telling Enoch what to go back to the Watchers, these fallen angels, and tell them, because they have crossed the line. They are not to take these women as their wives. They are not to impregnate the daughters of men, but they've done this, and he's talking about how they've created the giants out of this. So verse 8 is where we start getting into this idea of what happens to these giants when they die. And now the giants who are produced from the spirits of flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits proceeded from their bodies, because they are born from men, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. They shall be evil spirits on earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. As for the spirits of heaven, in heaven shall be their dwelling. But as for the spirits of the earth, which are born upon the earth, on the earth shall be their dwelling. The spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men, against the women, because they have proceeded from them. So this is what Yahweh is telling Enoch to tell the Watchers, that, hey, when these evil giants die, they will have nowhere to go, and they will afflict mankind until the end of time. And if you jump to chapter 16, verse 1, from the days of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the souls of whose flesh the spirits having gone forth shall destroy without incurring judgment. Thus shall they destroy until the day of consummation, the great judgment, in which the age shall be consummated over the Watchers, and the godless, yea, shall be wholly consummated. So it's just saying that until the end of time, till we get to the final judgment, these demonic entities are going to harass mankind. And now it's the Watchers who have sent thee to intercede for them, who had been for a time in heaven. Say to them, you have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you. And you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women. And through these mysteries, women and men work much evil on earth. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. So there is no peace for the demonic entities. There is no peace for these fallen angels either. So this is where we get the idea, right? This is where it's said pretty specifically, but there are a couple verses in the canonical Bible that also allude to this fact as well. We have Isaiah 26:14. The dead will not live, the departed spirits will not rise. Therefore, you have punished and destroyed them. You have wiped out all memory of them. This is in the Berean Standard. When you translate the departed spirits, the departed is Rephaim. That is the word for giants. So Rephaim, these departed spirits, are dead and they will not rise, but obviously they are spirits who are malevolent, and their whole purpose is to attack and to disrupt us. And I think even looking for host bodies to possess. Now, if we look at the Douay-Rheims version, which, by the way, the Douay-Rheims Bible is also known as the Douay-Rheims version, is translated of the Bible from the Latin Vulgate into English, made by members of the English College Douay in the service of the Catholic Church. And you'll see that in the Douay-Rheims Bible, there will be several apocryphal books added in to this particular version. I will say this, when it comes to some of these giant translations, I like this one a lot because they don't shy away from using the word giant a lot, where right here, where it's Rephaim, they actually translate it, let not the dead live, let not the giants rise again. So the Douay-Rheims version does not shy away from translating these words, these Hebrew words that we know, into actual giant. We know that Rephaim are giants. We know that's exactly what they are. There's not another explanation for that outside of when we look at the root of Raphaim, which is Rapha, and Rapha stands for shades, ghosts, or spirits. But, and I've said this before, that Rapha can be translated into several other words. And the one that people most think about is to heal, to cure, to restore, which honestly also plays into these giants as well, because the idea that these Raphaim could be to heal or be healed also means resurrection. So this plays into the idea that their ability to be reincarnated by jumping into some sort of host body. And I know that we've talked about several ways that they could possibly do this. One way would be if there was some sort of meat sack created for them to host, i.e., gray aliens, cryptids, some of these things that are created for them to host. But the other would be demonic possession. And this is where I get into my first story. So back in 2003, I was with my girlfriend at the time, and she had a long background of being involved in the occult. She wasn't practicing at the time, but she was a witch at one point, and she had crossed the line in her early life with putting curses on people and doing things that have a very negative impact back on you. It's like a boomerang effect. Yeah, you may make this happen to somebody, but the boomerang effect, what's coming back to you, ends up being a lot worse. And a lot of that stuff was plaguing her for a long time. And she had a very messed up past, and bad things happen to her. And a lot of times these demonic entities will prey on people like that are weak. And I'll say at the time, I was not involved in the occult at all. For as a matter of fact, I didn't want anything to do with it. This was before I went down the dark path that I've talked to most people that have known of me for the past 4 years. This is before I got a very deep interest in it and wanting to dive into it as deep as I could so I could use it for me. So this is not during that period of time. So any of this kind of stuff bothered me. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I can say one night we were laying down and I was talking to her and her voice changed. And it started with, first, she said, "The girl's at the end of the bed." And I want to preface it with, there used to be this spirit that looked like a little girl that followed her everywhere. Sometimes we'd be places and she would say, "Oh, she's over here. She's following behind the car," all the time. Well, one night she said, "Well, she's at the end of the bed." And I'm already getting freaked out at this point because at the time I don't want anything to do with that stuff. So I'm not really wanting to hear about it. And after I say, "Listen, I don't want to hear about that stuff," her voice changes. And she says a phrase to me that only my mom told me when I was little, when I would try to get my way about things. She looks at me and says, "You're a manipulator." But it came out more akin to something like this: "You're a manipulator." It was like some sort of deep male voice that came out of her. Now, when that happened, I jumped up out of the bed, turned the light on, and when I did, she had a hair barrette that was on the floor and it shot up and hit the ceiling right when that happened. And I'm kind of freaking out. I'm like, "What did you just say? What did you just say?" And it's almost like she shook it off and she said, "What? What are you talking about?" She doesn't even remember doing it. So that was one of my first interactions with anything that I would consider a demonic entity. And I do believe that something had taken a hold of her in that period of time. And this was kind of my first introduction into that stuff, because I was always taught, and my dad is a preacher, but he also had a very dark past in the occult. He was actually training to be a part of the Church of Satan at one point. So his testimony is fascinating. But he had always taught me about these things. And I wasn't at the point in my life where I was trying to cross over into tapping into that world to then get what I wanted out of life, which was to be famous, have power and money and all these things that I wanted. This was way before that, but I do think this was kind of my first introduction into it because this was the first time, significant time in my life where I had something really strange happen that I couldn't explain. And I can honestly say, looking back on that story, that it was for sure a demonic entity that was speaking through her. And I do think that they were able to get access to her pretty easily because of what she had been involved in years ago. And I don't think that you can shake that stuff off lightly. I think it's something that you have to work to get yourself out of. I'm not saying that God's love and grace doesn't cover all. It does. But once you've been involved in things for years, it's tough to rewire your brain to think differently outside of that. And these entities, while they may not possess you after that point in time, they can oppress. But to someone that I know who wasn't in a state of wanting forgiveness from God like that she was very open to possession. So I think that's exactly what happened at that point in time. And again, I think it pushed me down a road that I became interested in that type of stuff, even if at the time I wasn't really. So I'm going to move into the next story, but I'm also going to set it up with some of the research to give you guys an idea of some things that what I saw could be. This is going to be more UFO based. This is probably my biggest UFO story outside of what I saw when we shot The Shape of Shadows, and I saw like 30 UFOs light up the sky for an hour and a half. This would be in the same pantheon as that, but this was a long time ago. And I can say this happened around, I want to say 2010, I think is when it happened. So we're going to get to the story in a second, but I do want to get into the types of UFOs. And I want to talk specifically about black triangle UFOs, but I do want to talk about something that's been really blowing up in the media today. It is all of these quote unquote drones that are said to be manned aircraft flown lawfully by the White House. And I'm sure if you're at all interested in UFOs or you're part of the conspiratorial world, you have seen tons of recordings out there of these UFOs, what they look like. Listen, we know that whatever's being filmed is something real. I know people want to point to Project Bluebeam. Please, I encourage you, please go back and listen to the episode I did about Project Bluebeam if you want my thoughts on all that. I don't negate the possibility of there being holographic technology out there to trick people. I just don't think when all this stuff's revealed, it's going to be of a holographic nature. I think that's not going to be the trick. The trick is going to be presenting you with extraterrestrial or interdimensional life, and they're going to be presented in a way that's positive for humanity, when I don't think that that's their agenda in the first place. But all these mysterious drones have been flying over New Jersey to the point that the White House had to come out and talk about it. And John Kirby, he's a national security spokesman, came out and said, "We have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security or public safety threat or have a foreign nexus." So he's basically saying that, hey, we're not going to shoot them out of the sky. They're not a threat. They're just drones. But the problem is they don't know where the drones came from. They're saying they're drones, but they don't know where they came from. He says we should be doing some very urgent intelligence analysis and take them out of the sky, especially if they're flying over airports or military bases. Now, this is not him, but this is Senator Richard Blumenthal, and he's a senator in Connecticut. And that's his concern about the drones. So he's saying that if they're flying over airports and military bases, they need to be shot out of the sky. And this is just back to they don't know what they are, but they're not willing to find out. Well, that doesn't make sense either. So clearly there's something they're not telling us. It's either A, it is government operated and they're just taking them out and seeing what they can do in more of a public setting, which I think that's going to be part of the trick. But it could also be these interdimensional beings, these grays, quote unquote, which I think are meat sack hosts for these Nephilim spirits. I think most people know what I think about grays in general. However, I do think that fallen angelic beings can shapeshift. We know this throughout scripture. So they could for sure present themselves as gray aliens depending on the circumstances. So I don't think all grays are the same. Very similar. I don't think all Bigfoot are the same or all dogmen are the same. I think it just depends on the setting, depending on, what entity is engaging with mankind in that setting. But there have been some interesting pictures, which I'm going to show you now. We're going to show you a few pictures of some weird stuff that's popping up. Some of them look like airplanes with a bunch of weird lights underneath them. It's funny that people that are recording them are like, man, this thing's huge. But then we've got the media saying, oh, no, it's just a small drone. Don't worry about it. There's a really interesting video that came out. I'm going to show it to you now. That looks like nothing I've ever seen. That, to me, looks very similar to what we would call the Ophanim or thrones in angelology. These are the angelic beings that are the wheels, that have the eyes on the wheels. And you'll notice this one is moving in a very similar manner. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying it looks a lot like what's being talked about biblically with these wheels that Ezekiel saw. Very similar, these Ophanim. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on with this whole drone situation, and that would be a whole other episode, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up as I'm talking about my UFO sighting, what's going on right now in the media. Now, we're talking about these black triangle UFOs. They're generally observed at night, and they're described as large, silent, hovering, moving slowly, and sometimes they display pulsating colored lights, which they can turn off. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I talk about my particular encounter that I had several years ago. Now, in a declassified report from the UK Ministry of Defense, when they addressed UAPs, they talked about a project called Project Condign. And this is when the study was done about these UFOs between 1997 and 2000. The report said the majority, if not all, of the hitherto unexplained reports may well be due to atmospheric gases, electrically charged buoyant plasmas. So this goes back to that weird plasma phenomenon that they talk about that they see, that they can't explain. I'll say this, if it is in some sort of weird gaseous, electrically charged plasma state, or it's something that doesn't look solid, but it's in the upper atmosphere, I would suggest that it would be something like my friends from Cryptids of the Corn would talk about, biological UFOs, which, by the way, if you can, go to Amazon, support Justin England and his book about biological UFOs, where he explains all the different types. But I would say that that might be more what's being talked about here when they're talking about this gaseous state, because we do know there are these manta ray type giant biological UFOs that have been actually shot out of the sky in South America, that the Smithsonian came and picked up the body. That might be what you're seeing here. But the problem is a lot of these black triangular UFOs look solid and they're hovering. They look mechanical for several people that have seen them. And this will play into the Belgian UFO wave that happened from 1989 and 1992. There were 30 different groups that saw these large objects flying at low altitude. And they say the craft was flat and triangular with lights underneath, and it did not make a sound as it slowly moved across the landscape in Belgium. And there were tons of these witnesses that saw this, which is very interesting. And I think this lends more into some sort of craft that's either being tested by the government or it's interdimensional. And it's a craft that's used by these entities. I know most people know the 1997 Phoenix Lights incident, and this was very similar because the lights seem to be in a V-shape formation, and some residents reported one of the black triangles was over a mile wide, and it drifted slowly over their houses, and it blocked out the stars. And there's tons of videos, guys, online of the Phoenix Lights incident. It's a very famous one. It's very interesting, too, because these UFOs are massive. And this will lend me more into my particular story that happened to me. And I want to preface it with, I wasn't on anything, wasn't drinking, it was nothing. I was stone cold sober. I know people, when they hear these stories, like, what were you on? Nothing. And I can say that emphatically with the 3 stories I'm telling today. So either I'm lying or I'm crazy. And maybe I'm crazy. But I can't say I was sober. So I was in my apartment at the time with my roommate and one of our good friends. And we were hanging out. I think we were working on some music. And one of my friends smoked cigarettes and he wanted to step outside to smoke. So we walk out front. We're kind of just looking at the night sky. And at the time, I lived in a place called Warner Robins, Georgia. Warner Robins has one of the largest Air Force bases in America there in the city. So there are things that have been seen in the area that seem weird. I know there's like this orchard close to where I grew up in my high school years on to my adult life, and it's owned by the government, but it's blocked off in a way that you wonder, why is this orchard there? Because they're not using that orchard for anything. And people have speculated that there's some sort of underground facility there, and there has been a lot of UFOs seen in that area too. Now I can see where the apartment I lived in was located. It wasn't close to that side of town. So this was more in the city. And the Air Force Base is probably 2-3 miles away. Maybe. It wasn't very far. And I know we're standing outside the front of the apartment and we're looking around the sky and we notice it looks like exactly what was just said here with the Phoenix Lights incident where the stars are blocked out. We noticed there was an area where it seemed like the stars were blocked out. And then we saw these, it looked like little lights, but we weren't sure exactly what they were because we're just trying to take it in right now. And all 3 of us were big into UFOs. And I want to say this is around the time that Ancient Aliens was really hitting its stride. And we loved Ancient Aliens back then. And we're watching these little dots move around. At first, we think they're stars. And we notice that, why are they moving around like circular motions? And what is this big thing blotted out? Well, then we noticed there are lights blinking. And it was almost in a perfect triangle. And this thing is massive. We're talking, I couldn't tell you how big, right? When they say a mile, I'm thinking around that because it was so high. But then we noticed that these little lights that are moving around are going in and out of it. So that's what lends the idea that this thing was massive and that whatever these other smaller lights were smaller craft that were moving in and out of this massive triangular UFO. I mean, we sat out there and watched this thing for about an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And we were just blown away. And then at some point, it just vanished. It wasn't there anymore. We can't explain it. And we talked about it for weeks on end. And it was just one of those things where you just happened to be outside, you saw this crazy thing, and what looked like a giant ship with smaller ships moving in and out of it. I don't know. I know some people have suggested what's going on in New Jersey right now, that there is a mothership to these drones. They call it the drone mothership. I don't know why they love using the word drone and weather balloon all the time for things that people clearly see are neither. And I'm not saying that what's going on in New Jersey isn't man-made, or even what I saw was man-made. It could very well be operated by human beings. I'm just saying that it's unidentified. These are things that we don't know what they are. And I think that what's going on in New Jersey right now is just part of the ramp up for whatever they're planning with this entire UFO agenda. Now, I have an idea what it is, but I don't think that it's fake. I really don't. And I don't think it's going to be presented as fake. And I know all these people think it's a distraction from the real truth. And listen, we know the conspiratorial community and how they're the most divided community on the planet. And this would be a prime example of that. You're going to have a group of people who think it's all fake. It's all being conjured up by the government to control us. And there could be a piece of that that's true, but it just is not over encompassing all of it. And I think there's a huge spiritual aspect that's going on with these UFOs, with these UAPs, with these interdimensional beings that don't have our best interests at heart. So that is my UFO story. And like I said, outside of the Shape of Shadows, I would say that it's probably the most prominent story that I have UFO-wise that I've seen. It's pretty wild, and it's stuck in my head all these years, so I thought I would share that with you guys today. So now we're going to jump into Lilith. Now, I'm not doing a whole episode about Lilith. I will briefly talk about a few of the places biblically, a few of the places in mythology that Lilith has been used, and then I'll tell you the story of my interaction and what I think was a Lilith type spirit. Now, you may have heard me tell this story on the confessionals. I believe I got a little shook up on that episode too. And the reason why I did get shook up is because I didn't think about my story as being a part of this Lilith lore until I started talking to people who had these experiences. And Justin Kaiser, who I just had on the show, who did the history of the Elohim with me, when he talked about his Lilith interaction, he's done an inordinate amount of research on the Lilith topic. When he said the story, when I told my story, I got kind of shook up because I was interacting with what seems to be a Lilith type demonic entity. Now, preface before I break down a little bit about Lilith and before I get into my interaction, I was deep into the occult at this point. I was actively trying and actively interacting with entities, and I was pushing to obtain what I wanted to obtain. So these entities at this point did not bother me, and I was actively trying to engage with them. And when I tell you the story, you'll see my reaction to this entity when she shows up and what I did with that. But for people that don't know, Lilith is a female figure in Mesopotamian and Jewish mythology. She's theorized to be the first wife of Adam and supposedly the primordial she-demon. Lilith is also cited as having been banished from the Garden of Eden for not complying with and obeying Adam. So the idea is that Adam had a first wife, and this is just one of many convoluted stories. So it's not the end-all be-all when it comes to Lilith. We're just going to tell a few things that Lilith could be and leave it up to you to try to figure it out. At the end of the day, there's so many different stories that have been told about Lilith throughout history that I don't think we'll ever really know who Lilith was. I don't know, right? I think there's a huge connection with her and the fallen angel Samael. They have been said to have sired children together, and these are these demonic entities also that attack us. Maybe, I don't know. It's one of the stories that's out there. And I think that all these stories probably have some sort of emoticon of truth to them, or at least the entities that are telling these stories to people to write down are wanting Lilith to be presented in a certain light. Now, in the Bible, the word Lilith or Lilith is only used one time, and this happens in Isaiah 34. And we'll start at verse 12. No nobles will be left to proclaim a king, and all her princes will come to nothing. Her towers will be overgrown with thorns, her fortresses with thistles and briars. She will become a haunt for jackals, an abode for ostriches. The desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and one wild goat will call to another. There the night creature will settle and find her place of repose. So this is in the Berean Standard. But when you look in the Hebrew, where it says night creature, that is the word Lilith. It's the only time it's been used in the Bible, period. And this is where we get the idea of this Lilith demonic entity. Now, we also know that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were 19 fragments of Isaiah found at the Qumran caves. And this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's the oldest known written copy of the book of Isaiah. And in 34:14, the verbiage renders the creature as plural, Liliot or Lilith. But in the Masoretic text, Hebrew, it has it as singular form, which is Lilith. So we have a couple different translations here, but the oldest known copy of the book of Enoch actually has it as a plural, which I do think that the spirit of Lilith permeates as plural entities. I don't think it's just the one. I think it started with one, and there may be a central figurehead, an actual Lilith, but I do think that there are these other demonic Liliths that are from this first one, and they act in the same way. They want to tempt in the same way. They want to bring about a spirit of confusion, especially when it comes to sexual activities. This is their main purpose. Now, we were talking about the Douay-Rheims Bible earlier, and again, I do like the Douay-Rheims when it comes to translations of monstrous beasts, demonic entities, and giants, because they'll get right to the point. They don't shy away from what these things are. And if we look at Isaiah 34:14 here, it says, and demons and monsters shall meet, and the hairy ones shall cry out one to another, which you will see a lot of Bigfoot researchers who tie Bigfoot into canonically biblical and extra canonically biblical text. They will point to this verse as saying that this is how these Bigfoot, at least these Nephilim versions, are connected to the Lilith demonic entity, because sometimes these creatures are seen in the same areas. And it says, there hath the Lamia lain down and found rest for herself, which Lamia is also another word for Lilith, which I found really fascinating that the Douay-Rheims really went there. And again, that's why I love looking at that translation, especially when I'm looking at certain verses that I know have to do with giants or hybrids. I can always go to this version and I can say, they're going to give me the English version of hybrids, which I encourage anybody, when you're looking at biblical text, go and look into the Hebrew, go look at the Koine Greek, look at the actual translations, and then look at other translations too. And then you can start getting a fuller picture of what the text is actually saying. So this is where we find that word Lilith in the Bible in Isaiah 34. But Lilith's brought up a lot in different areas. We know that in the Dead Sea Scrolls also, there was the Song of the Sage. And in 4Q 510, 511, Fragment 1, and if you remember when I did the second episode of Good Nephilim, I explained what the 4Q or the Qs mean. This is the quadrants that these fragments were found in. So anytime you see the pieces of Dead Sea Scrolls talked about, you'll see it written down that way. And it says, "And I, the instructor, proclaim his glorious splendor so as to frighten and to terrify all the spirits, the destroying angels, spirits of the bastards, demons, Lilith, howlers, and desert dwellers, and those which fall upon men without warning to lead them astray from a spirit of understanding and to make their heart and their desolate during the present dominion of wickedness and predetermined time of humiliations for the sons of light by the guilt of ages of those smitten by iniquity, not for eternal destruction, but for an era of humiliation for transgression." So I find that really fascinating in this Songs of the Sage, where it talks about Lilith being lumped in with these other negative entities. And it's saying that it's not even there for eternal destruction, but for an era of humiliation for transgression. So wickedness, humiliation, all of these things that we see globally now that are happening in all these countries, all these people in power that are subjugated to a lot of these rituals, that we're subjugated to a lot of these rituals without even knowing it because of what they're giving us. This is exactly what it's being talked about in these Dead Sea Scrolls, and Lilith's a part of that. I think that this Lilith demonic entity is in the same grouping as what these Nephilim spirits are. And I don't think all demonic entities are the same. And I do think that, yes, there's a large portion that are these Nephilim spirits, right? But I don't think that's the end all be all either, because we don't know how the supernatural world works. And we do have this Lilith archetype as well. That's not necessarily from this hybridization that we know about in Genesis 6. Now, one of the most interesting stories about Lilith, I think, comes from the alphabet of Ben Sira, which is the alphabet of Sirach, and is anonymous text of the Middle Ages. And it's inspired by the book of Sirach, also known as the Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus. It is an original Jewish work, originally written in biblical Hebrew, and it consists of teachings written approximately between 196 and 175 BC by Yeshua ben Eleazar ben Sira, and he was a Hellenistic Jewish scribe of the Second Temple period. Now, the story that he writes about, this is this idea that Lilith was the first woman. And where they get this idea from is that in Genesis 1:27, it's indicated that a woman was created with Adam. But then in Genesis 2:22, it describes God's creation of Eve from Adam's rib. So these theologians of the time, these rabbis, argued about, was this two women, or was this just verbiage that was being used in the first chapter that was just defining that, hey, man and woman were made, but now we're going to go into detail about it. And I think that's been the argument of Lilith's inclusion as being Adam's first wife, is because it could very well be that chapter 1 was just mapping it out, and then chapter 2 was more descriptive of how that it was done. I'm open to whatever. Again, I think that I lean more towards chapter 2 being a more descriptive piece of what's going on in chapter 1, but I'm not throwing it out that Lilith couldn't have been some way connected to Adam. It's possible, but I lean towards some other theories, I think, when it comes to Lilith, as opposed to her necessarily being the first wife of Adam. Now, the story that Ben Sira tells, he says, after God created Adam, who was alone, he said, it is not good for man to be alone. He then created a woman for Adam from the earth, just like Adam was created, and called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, I will not lie below. And he said, I will not lie beneath you, but only on top. For you are fit only to be in the bottom position, while I am to be the superior one. Lilith responded, we are equal to each other inasmuch as we were both created from the earth. But they would not listen to one another. When Lilith saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. So she had wings. And this leads more into what I think Lilith might be, but she has wings. So Adam stood in prayer before his creator, Yahweh. Sovereign of the universe, he said, the woman you gave me has run away. At once the Holy One, be blessed, sent these three angels, Senoi, and Semangaloth, to bring her back. Said the Holy One to Adam, if she agrees to come back, what is made is good. If not, she must permit 100 of her children to die every day. The angels left God and pursued Lilith, whom they overtook in the midst of the sea and the mighty waters wherein the Egyptians were destined to drown. So this is in the Red Sea. They told her God's word, but she did not wish to return. The angel said, we shall drown you in the sea. Leave me, she said. I was created only to cause sickness to infants. The infant is male. I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and if female for 20 days. When the angels heard Lilith's words, they insisted she go back, but she swore to them by the name of the living and eternal God. Whenever I see you or your names or your forms in an amulet, I will have no power over that infant. She also agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Accordingly, every day 100 demons perish. And for the same reason, we write the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath, and the child recovers. So this is where we get the idea that these text amulets were put around the neck of newborn boys to protect them from Lilith until their circumcision. So they would put these amulets with Senoi, Sensenoi, and Semangaloth on these amulets to protect these babies from Lilith. Now, again, we don't know how much of this is true, how much of this is just lore. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Some people think that the alphabet of Ben Sira is a collection of folk tales, a refutation of Christian ideologies, and it's possible. Some people think it's even anti-Jewish satire, even though it was technically a derivative from a Jewish rabbi, but this was written in medieval Germany. So whoever wrote this story about Lilith, but it has survived. It's survived this whole time. And I would argue that there may be some sort of truth to it. I don't know how much. So I think the idea of Lilith being able to have demonic children, I think that plays a lot into the idea of her hooking up with Samael and them producing these demonic spirits that we see and hear about throughout history. Because one thing we do know, there were demonic spirits harassing the early patriarchs before this incident that happened on Mount Hermon with the Watchers. So that didn't happen until about the 7th generation down on Cain's side with Lamech around that period of time. So there were demonic entities before that. So were they a derivative of this? Were they a derivative of Lilith and Samael's connection? I don't know. I'm just throwing out different ideas because a lot of this, we don't know how it works. But I find it fascinating. I find the stories of Lilith super fascinating. There's so many. I mean, there's so many different ones. And again, I can't go through all of it today. But it said when she was kicked out of the Garden of Eden for not submitting to Adam, and she connected with Samael, is when they created the male demonic entities, the Mazakim, and then the female demonic entities, the Shadim, which I'm sure people have heard the word Mazikeen before, especially in fictional literature when it comes to demonic entities. And Samael is also known as the angel of death for anybody that wants to know. So he was loosed many times to cause destruction at God's behest, even though he wasn't working for God at the time. It's kind of like God just kind of opened the door, like, go ahead and do your thing. So this happened with Pharaoh and all of the newborns at the last plague when Moses was trying to get Pharaoh to let his people go. And this is when this angel of death, or Samael, went and took care of all of these newborns that didn't have the blood of the lamb over the doorpost. And we also know of Lilith coming up in Faustian texts, and in the 1808 work, Faust, the first part of the tragedy, Faust is talking to Mephistopheles, who, this is where we get the idea of the Faustian bargain, where Faust wants to obtain the things that he can't obtain. So Mephistopheles asks for his soul in return. This is why when someone sells their soul to achieve certain things in life, it's called the Faustian bargain. So Faust is talking to Mephistopheles, and he says, "Who's that there? Take a good look. Lilith. Lilith, who is that? Adam's wife, his first. Beware of her. Her beauty's one boast is her dangerous hair. When Lilith winds it tight around young men, she doesn't soon let go of them again." So Mephistopheles offers this warning to Faust, but then, ironically, he tells him to dance with the pretty witch. So Faust does. He doesn't end up dying because of this, according to this writing. But even when it comes to Faust, this Lilith demonic entity is brought into play. Now, I kind of gave you a light setup for who Lilith is. I do have some ideas on my own, and I think she may have come from a period of old Earth. And I think we get that from the Sumerian Kings list. And I've done an entire episode on the Sumerian Kings list, and I encourage people to go listen to that episode. But in the Sumerian Kings list, this is after that flood that I think happened before Adam, during this time of Gilgamesh. In the Kings list, it says he captured Inme Baraj Sea single-handed. Gilgamesh, whose father was a Lilu, was a Lilith, was a demonic entity. The Lord of Kulaba ruled for 126 years. And there are other stories, even in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, where he has contact with Lilith by a lupu tree that is in Inanna's garden in Uruk. And that's a pretty interesting story too. But Lilith does pop up a lot in Sumerian stories, just as much as she does in these Hebrew stories too. So she's definitely something that exists, but where she exactly comes from, we don't know. And one of my thoughts is because she has wings and she's able to fly, it's said that this pre-Adamite man, the Agigi, as it's talked about in the Sumerian Ugaritic text, they had wings. So I kind of attributed that to maybe some of these pre-Adamite people had wings because of the involvement of angelic beings and genetically modifying all kinds of things even prior to Adam, that maybe she's one of those types of experiments. Maybe she came from that era and she's back after this particular flood. And there's a host of different ways that's possible. We won't get into today, but maybe she was from that era. And maybe that's why she was a holdover from that era. And then she connected with Samael, or maybe knew Samael from before, and they created these demonic entities. Just theorizing there, but it makes sense if you put the dots together. And it also makes sense in the fact that none of us actually know who Lilith is or what these demonic entities who spawn off from her, these Lilu, actually do or came from. Now, this gets into my particular story, which again, it was during a period of time where I was trying to conjure these things. And a lot of times these entities would not show up when I wanted them to. They do what they want. They typically would happen when I would least expect it. Now, this particular night, I was laying down and I wasn't asleep. I was on my side and I was laying, and I looked, and it looked like my grandmother was laying next to me. Now, she had died at this time, and she was in all white. She looked just like my grandmother, talked just like my grandmother. And she started saying, I don't remember exactly, how are you, sweet boy? Typical grandmother stuff. Now, I'm very aware of things. And typically, when it comes to family members presenting themselves to people, I don't think generally that they are good. I think they are demonic entities that are masquerading as family members to get someone to do something that they shouldn't do. I wouldn't say in all cases, because we do know that Saul tried to conjure Samuel from a witch, and the real Samuel did come and talk to him. So we know it can happen. I don't put that out of the realm of possibility at all. I think there's plenty of stories of people where a family member appeared and they swerved back on the road because of it, or it caused them to not go a certain way where there was danger. I think that it can totally happen, especially if it's God's will. So I don't put that out of the realm of possibility. But I will say in a lot of cases, it's going to be demonic entities. And I knew it was a demonic entity. So I laughed and looked at it dead in the face. And I said, show yourself. So it laughed back at me, and it did. It basically changed into something pretty hideous, was still in this white dress. And I want to say, like, I reached out to it or whatever. I was pretty angry because I wanted what I wanted out of life, and these things were going to give it to me, but they were toying with me. And that's kind of how it happens. It's not going to be, you're going to get what you want, how you want it. They're going to take you to the edge, take everything they want, and then you might get what you want. It's not always the case. Some people, quote unquote, sell their souls and never get what they want. These demonic entities are tricksters. They just want to take you down a dark path. So I said, give me what I want. It kept laughing at me, and it started sliding off the bed till it was standing at the end of my bed. I think I was yelling at it, and it ended up disappearing. And at the time, I just thought it was a demonic entity that I was trying to reach to get what I wanted. I didn't even put it in the context of it being this Lilith character, which now I know the white dress imagery. Now, I didn't get a good look at its feet, and I know that people talk about that Lilith has bird-like feet, owl-like feet. That's why we'll hear stories that there'll be this lady of the woods in Appalachia wearing clown shoes to cover up the fact that she has bird feet. I didn't see that. I just saw what looked like my grandmother morph into something female, but hideous, and then slide off my bed and stand at the end of my bed while I yelled at it, and it disappeared. So that is my Lilith story. And I do believe that it was, I'm not going to say it was the Lilith, but it was some version of this type of Lilith entity that toys and plays with mankind. And I was at a very vulnerable stage where I was willing to do just about whatever to get what I wanted. Fortunately enough for me, I had several roadblocks that happened in my life that drove me off the path. And I do think that was people that cared about me, that prayed for me. And again, I wasn't even ready to walk down a path with God at the time. I just knew that I needed to take care of certain responsibilities I had in my life. And I wasn't willing to toss my kids away to get these things. And I think that was a big, big thing that I needed to sell. There are certain things that come along and they want you to sell to get what you want, these entities. And if you're not willing to do that, they're not going to give you those things. And I think that was a huge part for me. And then over the next 10 years, I can look at every year I got closer and closer to God, to a point where I was walking with God and I started growing. And I think that's what I would consider my phase right now, in a growing phase, constant growing phase. I don't think it ever ends, but that's where I'm at now. And I can say, from somebody who got very deep into occult practices, there's always a way out, guys. You're not doomed forever. And don't listen to these Christians that try to act like that you don't have a way out, or because of your past that they'll never listen to you, they'll never talk to you, or whatever. Don't listen to those people. And don't even listen to people on the other end of it too, where you've changed and grown and they're acting like that you are doing it for the wrong reasons. Or you're just doing that because you think that that's going to get you somewhere in life, or it's going to get you around the right people to be successful. Don't listen to them either. Do what your heart's telling you to do, especially when it comes to God, whatever he's impressing upon you. And that will be revealed more and more the closer you get to him. So I just want to say that, coming from a place of experience, that I know that there's always a way out. But I thought it'd be really cool over this Christmas week to give you some stories and give you a little background research to these stories, and let you know a little bit more about me. And I'm sure that as the show goes, I'll reveal more and more depending on what the episode's about. I do like talking about where I came from, because I feel like that there are so many people out there that have had all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of things happen to them that have lost hope. And I think that we all can have hope, and we can all have redemption. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Now I'm going to read some 5-star reviews and some comments. We're going to start with Apple. Boys in the Woods, fantastic. I love the way you present the show and keep everyone engaged, not to mention your songs are fire. Keep it going. Appreciate that, Boys in the Woods. We've got Danny Lynn Williams. Always a banger. Joel kills it every episode. For once in my life, I found someone that knows what discernment means. I appreciate the fact that you have a biblical view, but still remain gangster. Keep on keeping it real. There are not many out there. Appreciate that, Danny. We have Bigfoot Ray. Jesus loves you. Great show. Keep up the good work. Appreciate that, Bigfoot Ray. We're going to go to Spotify now. We got James Hoberty. Got to see out all the podcasts I regularly listen to. Yours are always the ones I look forward to the most. Very detailed and well-researched. Love everything you're doing. Keep it up. Appreciate that, James. And we've got Bluntman J. Interesting name. Always a great podcast. God bless. Appreciate that. We've got Dawn Evans. Great job, guys. Loving the podcast. Appreciate that, Dawn. We're going to go to YouTube. We've got Creative OBX8367. LOL, I needed a good laugh today, and you provided me with several. I'm glad my friends and I aren't the only ones who think wrong and are okay poking fun at each other's mistakes. Good job. And he's referring to when Justin and I were giving it to Jay for misinterpreting what stones we were talking about, and him thinking it was the Rosetta Stone, which is pretty funny. We got Days1132. Brilliant episode. I thought trolls were short. Thank you. Very interesting. Appreciate that, Days. We got Gwendolyn Albert 4341. Wow, very interesting. Like the book by Steve Quayle, Little Creatures. Yes, it is. And that is a very interesting book. And Steve Quayle's got a ton of good books that I've read over the years. But guys, I really appreciate you being here. Make sure, if you haven't, go give a 5-star review anywhere you can. On any platform you can. It helps drive the algorithm up. It helps people that don't normally get these episodes, get the episodes in their feeds. Again, if you're not a member on YouTube, go subscribe. It's a way to donate to the show and help the show grow. And if you want to donate in a one-time donation, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/freetherabbits. All right, guys, we're going to play my song Shut Up and Drive on the way out. And you know what it is. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
Things away from enemies when revenge be near. To avenge my peers, I confess my sins right here. When a pelican swim and the great whites fly, aboard Noah's Ark and enjoy that ride. But the matrix don't care, we enjoy Cloud 9. 6'3" Nicola, no order particular. DeLorean dreams of the crack cell, but we know the crack gon' sell. So if it's a variable, don't work well. I wasn't here when Reagan was a cartel. Push a bar, do I rap, do I sing, do I preach? I don't know. Do I lack anything via love? No, I don't. But we gotta be a warrior too, cause that's just what warriors do. Baby, you cannot fool me with the eye. You get them every single time. I tell them shut up and try. Baby, you cannot fool me with the eye. You get them every single time. I tell them shut up and try.
Staring up at Olympus, tight spear back at pretentiousness. Decades of vintage, new Babylon built on contentiousness. Clash on the road to Rome, where gladiators who broken, but ain't no breaking us all.
They just wanna take the air, ain't caught, download the airs. Teleport the chopper, I'm a rebel like hair. Double helix intervening with Jesus, I'm a chimera. Looking at these golden years flying by fair false.
They cutting it off of the food too. Analytics they used to recruit you. Wars of painting the sets on your Sun Tzu.
They don't want an individual, just a carbon copy. True spitting that manicotti, yeah, I'm talking saucy. All they wanna build is a prison world full of pet Tamagotchis. Living kamikaze, got me out of body like I'm Goku SS3. They wanna push me to the center like a cell, they wanna splinter